And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on this Friday, January 10th, 2025. And a lot is going to be going on this weekend and early next week because we have a series of lows that are lifting across the North Pacific into the Bering or Gulf. And as a result, we're going to have a very active weather pattern. So right now, as of this Friday later morning, there's a low that's going to be passing just west of Nunavik Island and south of St. Lawrence Island. That's going to bring in an initial batch of some precipitation and wind. But by Saturday morning, we have another low out this way that's coming northward that'll brush the east side of Kodiak Island, the eastern Kenai, and kind of dissipate up here in the corner of the Gulf around Prince William Sound as we go through Saturday night. And then a stronger system is going to lift up across the eastern Aleutians into the eastern Bering just off of the southwest coast, and a strong frontal system with a lot of moisture and strong winds is going to come northward up and through the western Gulf, Alaska Peninsula, Cook Inlet. That's riding northward. That's going to arrive later Saturday night into Sunday and Sunday night. So a very active weather pattern. Widespread IFR conditions, though, Saturday morning from the Panhandle, Northern Gulf to Prince William Sound, eastern Kenai. We also have areas of IFR rather extensive, lower Chukchi along the west-southwest coast, with the initial lead low that has come up into this region on Friday, and then some areas of IFR along the south slopes of the Brooks Range. Saturday afternoon, we still have some IFR conditions along the south slopes of the Brooks Range there, especially entering into Adigan and Anatuvik passes. And we find IFR conditions lower Copper River Basin area around Valdez east through McCarthy, and then up along areas, especially intercoastal mountains of the Panhandle, and then back to the west, lower Chukchi, Bering Strait, western Seward Peninsula, out through Norton Sound, St. Lawrence, and into the lower Yukon Valley. And then here comes the hints of the next moist and windy system coming up from the North Pacific here, impacting the eastern Aleutians, tip of the Alaska Peninsula. And then Sunday morning, we find that moisture and wind spreading northward all up along areas of the western Gulf, the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, eastern Kenai, all and influences IFR conditions at least along the Gulf Coast into the Panhandle. But here's the main wind energy and precipitation coming north with that next stronger system. And then we find just widespread IFR conditions, lower ceilings as a result here from the Chukchi areas of lingering lighter precipitation down through the Seward Peninsula. I should mention, though, that some of that precipitation will be heavier. We're looking at the potential for some heavier snowfall as we creep up the Yukon Valley, especially later Saturday night through Sunday night. So by the time we get into Sunday afternoon, we have IFR conditions along the Gulf Coast, up into the northern Panhandle, along the southeastward facing slopes, the west arm of the Alaska Range, places like Lake Clark, Merrill, Rainy Passes. We still have IFR conditions along southeastward facing slopes here of the central eastern Brooks Range, and then all along the west coast from the YK Deltas up through the Seward Peninsula, Chukchi, Bering Strait, including St. Lawrence Island. So pass conditions Saturday, Anatuvik Pass, IFR, especially there southward. Same thing, Adigan Pass, IFR conditions with lower ceilings and some visibility, and at least potential for some lighter precipitation. Lake Clark and Merrill also stuck in that IFR conditions because you're going to be getting that easterly and then southeasterly flow ahead of a strong front lifting northward there as we go through Saturday night and early Sunday morning, plus some high winds. Rainy Pass IFR becoming MVFR on Saturday. Windy Pass should generally hold on to MVFR conditions during the day on Saturday, and then Isabel Pass also MVFR conditions. And as we get over toward Mentasta Pass, generally be able to hold on to VFR conditions there. But south of there in the Copper River Basin, you'll see conditions become MVFR. Tanita Pass, generally MVFR conditions for Saturday. And then Portage Pass, IFR conditions on Saturday, as we expect that to be the case, especially there out over Prince William Sound and along the eastern Kenai. And then certainly across the northern Panhandle, IFR conditions are expected there at Chilkoot and White. So we are seeing in advance of the stronger low that's going to come out of the North Pacific and actually pull up this way. It's the frontal system. There is a core of stronger winds and moisture that'll be surging northward Saturday into Sunday. And of course, we can see out ahead of that frontal system, the freezing levels aloft are bumping upwards to 4,000 feet in the Gulf, 6,000 feet around Haida Gwaii, and south of there, 8,000 feet. So that is what is an indicator there of more in the way of mild, moist air coming northward. And as a result, where there are any thicker clouds, and certainly those that are producing precipitation, the potential is for moderate icing above 6,000 feet along the northern Gulf Coast, above 8,000 feet as we get down outside of the Panhandle, lower Gulf, southeast Gulf. And then back to the west, we have areas above 4,000 feet, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, southeast Bering, extending up into areas of the southwest interior, especially to the west-northwest of the Alaska Range, and then potentially along the south slopes and north of the Yukon River, there could be some areas of moderate icing in the clouds there above 2,000 feet. And here is the way the upper-level jet pattern is shaping up on Saturday. We have this what we call anticyclonically curved jet core of 140 knots coming out of the Alaska Peninsula, southeast corner of the Bering up into Bristol Bay, and then coming back across into the Gulf, 120 knots there off the Kenai and outside of Prince William Sound. As we bring it down to 9,000 feet, 700 millibars, this is more noteworthy in that, okay, we also have southerly flow coming in across the Alaska Range. So within that region, there's going to be high winds, and certainly any flow through the gaps in the mountains here at higher elevations will have turbulence. But here's what we're watching to the south. This is an impressive core of mid-level winds that are of hurricane force, above 80 to 90 knots out here from the lower Gulf down to the North Pacific, south of the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. Now, as we get into Saturday afternoon, 3,000 foot level, you can see a core of those winds anywhere from 45 to as high as 75 knots down there in the North Pacific. And as this low center works its way up into the eastern Bering, it's going to force a strong front northward, and this is the area of winds that will overspread portions of the western Gulf, areas around Cook Inlet up into the Alaska Range. It's going to send a surge not just of moisture and milder air, but there's a potential for some record warmth. The temperatures getting back up into the 40s as this air mass comes up over southern, southeastern, into east central portions of the mainland, and eventually some of that also having impact into the Panhandle here Sunday into early Monday. So stay tuned to later forecasts, because this is going to bring about some very active weather. And of course, this is just for Saturday. We expect widespread moderate turbulence along and south of the Yukon River, especially across the Alaska Range, through any of the intercoastal mountains along the Gulf, back through the Alaska Peninsula. And the hint of those stronger winds coming up from the North Pacific will just beginning to approach areas south of the Alaska Peninsula and just south and east of Kodiak Island Saturday afternoon. Now, by the time we get into Saturday night and Sunday morning, this area will be expanding northeastward, so there'll be even some stronger winds. And there is a high wind watch for the Alaska Range for the time frame beyond this. But we're looking at turbulence surface to 20,000 feet all through the Alaska Range as a result, and in anticipation of those much stronger winds heading northeastward. We also find along the Gulf surface to 6,000 feet moderate turbulence. I would expect areas within here, there could be severe turbulence here Saturday night into Sunday morning especially. So stay tuned to a later forecast, because as this second more potent low comes up out of the North Pacific, it'll have a lot of weather associated with here later on this weekend.